in to see the wonderful, wondrous Andy Sturdivant and his talk tonight. So, yes, he's been sort of a staple at Stout, as I've been talking to him. So we're happy to have him back. So I just like to introduce you to him and give you a little bit of a bio. So Andy Sturdivant is the Artist Resources Director at Springboard for the Arts in St. Paul, Minnesota. Springboard for the Arts is an economic and community development organization for artists and by artists. From their offices in Fergus Falls and St. Paul, Minnesota, Springboard provides programs that help artists make a living and a life, and programs that help communities connect to the creative power of artists. Andy works with artists on grants, writing, legal questions, technical skills, and any other questions they have. In addition to his work at Springboard, Andy is also a writer, publisher, artist, and very occasional performer. He has written about art, history, and culture for a variety of publication and is an author of 3 books of nonfiction. He is also the creator of a number of small run art and design books distributed in the United States and Europe. His artwork has been exhibited at venues in New York City, Chicago, Philadelphia, and Seattle, and he has presented public programs with many organizations locally and regionally. Andy holds a BFA in painting from the University of Louisville and a graphic design certificate from Minneapolis College or Minneapolis Community and Technical College. So let's give a warm round of applause and some cheers silently to Andy for being here on this Tuesday evening. And I'm going to turn it over to Andy, and we're going to get started. Oh, and also he has told me that it's perfectly fine if you have questions during his presentation. He's going to be covering a variety of topics. So before things, flow too far downstream, feel free to ask a question, or you can hold your question to the end as well, and we will help address them. So, all right, Andy, feel
Thanks,
free
Erin.
to take it away.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay? Everything's all right?
Yes.
Okay, good. Super. Perfect. All right. Hi, everybody. Yeah, I'm Andy. It's nice to be here. I always enjoy coming to Stout. It's not quite the same to do it this way, but yeah, like Erin said, I've come to Stout a couple of times over the last couple of years and always had a really good experience. So yeah, I am here tonight to talk to you about a variety of things. This is sort of a a talk that I've kind of Frankenstein together from a few different talks. And the idea is to kind of provide the most information to you, the most relevant information to you across a couple of different areas and topics. Yeah, that's what we're going to try to do. One of the talks is kind of like, when we go around and tell people what Springboard does, because like Erin said at the top, like, what is Springboard? It's an economic and artist development organization. Like, what does that mean? That that can mean so many different things. And so part of it is I'm just going to tell you a little bit about what we do and, how that might be relevant to you, especially in the kind of months after you graduate and, hopefully in the years after you graduate. I've also got a lot of professional development work in here. A lot of the work that I do at Springboard is around like what you would call nuts and bolts issues. Like in some sense, my job is basically to sit by my phone in my inbox and wait for artists to ask me questions about like whatever things they need, which is everything from like, I need to do a commission on an aluminum wall and I don't know what paints are good for aluminum. What should I do? To like, I want to organize a co-op with all my friends and we don't know how to do that. So like basically everything in between those two poles is kind of like what I am charged with, not answering, but at the very least kind of directing people to. So I'm very happy to answer a very wide range of questions tonight. And then in addition to that, there's also kind of this talk is kind of a variation on one that I've given a few times over the past couple months. Just thinking about the landscape now, like the cultural landscape, the artistic landscape, like what, we're fingers crossed, kind of coming out of the worst of the pandemic and things are going to start to roll back into maybe some altered form of normalcy, who can say. But I think a lot of the things that we've been thinking about as artists are still going to be in play for the next year. So that's what I'm here to do. It's nice to have a group of this size because it means that if you do have questions about things that I'm talking about, or things that are immediately pertinent, you can jump in and you can ask those questions and we can answer them. But we'll have plenty of time at the end to talk to. And in fact, yeah, if we have some time at the end, it'd be nice to hear about what you all are working on, kind of what you're thinking about for the next couple of months. I presume a lot of you are juniors and seniors and are going to be graduating, and you got to figure out what you're going to do. Okay, I'm going to go into full screen mode so you can get the full immersive cinematic experience. Be like the IMAX of PDFs. Springboard for the Arts. Does everybody see that? It's a logo. It says Springboard for the Arts. That's where I work. That's us. Yeah. All right. That's yes. That is our logo. So what now for visual arts? And so I've got this kind of divvied up into 9 parts, and we're going to cover a lot of different aspects of answering that question, what now for visual arts? But they're primarily going to be focused on, what now for visual arts as, a person who is just coming out of your undergraduate and thinking about what you're going to be doing next. Okay, number 1. This is true. Well, I should say before I begin too, like I've got these organized around like 9 different points, which is probably a little TED Talkier than it needs to be. But I think the important part of all this is the thing that we've really learned in the last year is like nobody really knows how to do this, right? Nobody really knows how to do what we need to do in order to, kind of make a living or a career or a life as an artist. Anybody who tells you that they have like the definitive answers is probably trying to, sell you something. So, maybe the first thing to keep in mind is be skeptical if people come at you with lists of things, but I'm going to come at you with a list of things because that's just a really nice way to organize things. The first thing is to take care of yourself, your family, and your community. That's obviously something that I think became a huge, that's always been true, obviously, but I think it's much more of a priority, in the last year with just so much, death and economic devastation, and just it's been a really difficult year, in so many ways for so many people. So really, as artists, as humans, your first goal is to take care of yourself, your family, and your community, kind of equal parts, I suppose. And so, I'll start here by just talking a little bit about some of the resources that Springboard has to offer and just kind of springboards that or resources that exist otherwise. But the first thing to do is get familiar with local, regional, and national relief systems, whether those are federal, whether those are state, whether those are private, whether those are communal, whether those are anything else. I spent basically March through June talking to people who had lost their jobs, because they were working in the arts, they were working in theater, they were working in music. All the art shows went away, all the theaters closed, all the music venues closed. And so a lot of it was just kind of talking through a lot of these systems of support that exist. And so you're coming into a slightly more stable situation, I think, with respect to just the kind of the economic situation at large. You got your stimulus check, hopefully, but there are a lot of systems out there that can kind of continue to support you, support people you care about. And so it's a good idea to just kind of get familiar with those. And a good place to begin is actually on Springboard's website. Besides the work that we do in workshops, with consultations, with residency programs, and I'll talk some about those things, we also just have a really well-stocked website with information that is going to be useful to you as a person in the Midwest. We're based in Minnesota. We have offices in St. Paul and in Fergus Falls. But we work all across the upper Midwest. So we do a lot of work in Wisconsin, Iowa, North Dakota, South Dakota. So a lot of the resources that we have are specific to Minnesota. And if you are a Minnesotan who is, doing your temporary relocation in Wisconsin for your undergraduate, if you're going to be moving back to Minnesota, to the Twin Cities, a lot of the information that we have is on the website is going to be, geared towards that. But we do cover the whole Midwest. So specifically, if you go to our website and look for emergency resources, you will find a huge list of just all the resources that we could find, as far as emergency grants, emergency funding, The Paycheck Protection Program is something that you might have heard about, and that seems like something that would not be relevant to a student, but actually the Paycheck Protection Program has been a really great program for small businesses, and small businesses are basically anybody that is, selling something, and that could be an artist. There's mutual aid networks that have popped up all over the place, whether those are like food shelves, whether those are, social justice oriented. So there's just a lot out there, and the Springboard website can be a good hub for some of those things. As you're looking to just take care of your basic needs. And as with any of these things, I'm more than happy to answer questions about, specifics here as far as like specific types of emergency funding, specific, resources for mutual aid, things like that. In addition to that, Springboard has, like I said, a lot of services that are available to artists in the upper Midwest, and artists in Wisconsin and Minnesota as well. We do a whole series of workshops, and the workshops are really fun and engaging, and they cover all sorts of, great topics from e-commerce to, basic financial literacy to portfolio development, all those kinds of things. Just coming out of your undergraduate, your appetite for taking workshops and putting yourself into educational situations may have dwindled somewhat, but they're out there. Another thing that I think is really useful, and this is one of my favorite programs that we have, is a program called the Artist Career Consultant Program. So we have a roster of about 25 consultants, and this is just 4 of them right here. These are this is the F through G section. This is Annika, Aaron, Felix, and Candida. We have consultants that work in all different, types of work, have all kinds of different backgrounds, artistic disciplines, professional experiences, and they're available on a sliding scale from $0 to $70, with $45 being kind of in the middle. If you want to sit down with somebody for an hour and just kind of talk through really anything related to your artistic career. And you can see here, Annika, for example, does a lot with like editing and websites. Felix does a lot of work with, in that same area as well. Candida has a lot of experience with visual art, with grant writing, with public art. Aaron works in theater. So this is just a good opportunity to kind of sit down with somebody and talk to them for, an hour about, it can be very specific types of things. Like I do these consultations, and sometimes people will just come in and say like, my bio on my website is atrocious. I need to update it. I just need to sit down with somebody for an hour and go through this paragraph, these 3 paragraphs, and kind of whip them into shape. And so we can do that. Other people just, want to talk more like big picture about their artistic career, like what kind of work they're going to be doing, what they want to be doing. And so you can go to the Springboard website, springboardforthearts.org, and you can sign up for one of these, and you can meet one of these great people. You can even do a consultation with me if that's something that you would be interested in for whatever reason, because I have persuaded you after tonight's remarks that would be a good idea. But a lot of the work that I do in the consultations is about writing. I really enjoy working with artists about writing about their work, which is the kind of thing that a lot of artists hate doing. I love doing it. So if that's the kind of thing that you find yourself in need of, we'd be happy to help with that. So the next couple are going to be a little bit more general, kind of related to just, how to think about making work in this time. That's the great cliche that you hear, in this time, a time like this, in these unprecedented times, because they are unprecedented. And I guess we kind of have to approach them as such. So point number 2, a lot of programming that went virtual may stay virtual even after the summer. So try some things out. I do think that after everybody's vaccinated, and if it happens as quickly as it seems like it might, that by midsummer, there'll be the opportunity to go do things in person again. I think that there's going to be a huge appetite for people to want to get back out to galleries, want to get back out to like art crawls, want to get back out to, studio visits, do all this stuff that has kind of been denied to us for the last year. But I also have a sense that, and I don't know, I mean, this is not really based on anything other than conversations that I'm having with people, and, maybe you've been having similar conversations too. I think a lot of the programming that went virtual is going to stay virtual. I think especially around things like talks, like conferences, even, even things related to like social media, like events that are only happening like on Instagram Live or only happening on TikTok or only happening, on like YouTube streams or things like that. I think that, the genie is kind of out of the bottle on virtual programming. And so, I think it's a good idea to kind of keep your feet in that world as well. I think one of the really interesting things about this summer and this fall, and to a certain extent this winter too, is just kind of seeing the types of activities that were happening around. Just really seeing artists kind of step up to, being in these virtual spaces. These are two examples from the Twin Cities here. SUVAC, which is a gallery in Minneapolis, did a whole bunch of really interesting, kind of virtual events that were on Instagram Live, and I think they followed a few other formats as well. Hair and Nails, which is also another gallery in Minneapolis, did kind of what they called Hair and Nails TV, and it was just really interesting, kind of weird programming that wouldn't exactly work in person, but actually drew people together from a lot of different places. And I think people are going to be, reticent to give that up. I mean, I went to so many artist talks like on Zoom, in the last year, where it would just be people from all over the country that were able to kind of talk to each other and be in the same place in a way that I just don't really remember from before. So, I think things are going to shift back to like in-person work, but at the same time, I think a lot of stuff is still going to be happening virtually. So that's something to think about. To that point, the kind of follow-up to that is point 3, which is use the virtual space. Don't build inferior substitutions for in-person experiences. I think in some ways, like as artists for the next couple of years, maybe in perpetuity, who can say, I feel like there's going to be kind of a bifurcated existence, like you have your things that you're going to do in person, you'll have gallery shows, you'll have exhibitions, you'll do work, that appears in print, like all those types of things that, when you got your BFA in painting, you figured you were going to do, right? You were going to like take physical paintings to galleries and hang them on physical walls, and people were going to physically show up and, drink beer and eat cheese, like in each other's presence. And I think that's going to be true. But again, I think that a lot of artistic activity is going to be happening, online too. And so I think the worst types of things that I saw in the last year were situations a little bit like where people would try to take artistic programming and they would try to pretend that it was like the same thing as an in-person programming, in a way that just didn't really use the kind of tools that we have at our disposal, in virtual space. And like, in some ways, this talk is actually a really good example. Like if I was in person in Menominee talking to you all, I'd be standing like in front of a lectern and I'd be pointing at a slide, like on the wall, and I would be looking at your all's faces, and maybe you would raise your hand. And so, in some ways, the more that I try to replicate that experience for you in this space, the kind of less fulfilling it is. But we have something that we didn't have in that in-person environment, which is to say we have a little chat box, where I can like see what people are saying. You can kind of respond to what I'm saying in a more immediate, sort of like a less formal kind of way. We can have a different kind of conversation than we would have in person. Which is a way of saying when you're thinking about online programming, when you think about the kind of work that you want to do, like you can do stuff on like Instagram Live that would be completely different than the sort of thing you would do in person. Like one of the most enjoyable art events that I went to over the last year was I had a friend that put out a book about a trip that he'd made to Armenia. And specifically, he went to go explore like the fish stands of Armenia, because in Armenia, there's a lot of like roadside fish stands. And so he was giving a talk about that experience, and like in some ways it's just like a standard slideshow kind of situation. But what he actually did was did a screen share with Google Street View, and he actually recreated his path in Google Street View, kind of walking through, the parts of Armenia, like almost trying to lead like an in-person tour, but using, like using Google Street View. And there was, maybe like 20 or 25 people in attendance. And it was just a lot of like kind of talking, and it was like really chaotic, but it was so like it was so specific to that kind of online environment that it really stuck with me. So what I guess I'm saying here is, when you're doing online stuff, don't try to just build like inferior substitutions for in-person experiences. Like really use the space in some ways that are kind of interesting. Like you have a global audience. Like if you're using something like Instagram Live or Twitch or any of the other kind of streaming platforms that are out there. So use the space. And I don't know, I'd be interested to hear if anybody has seen anything like in the last year or so that kind of existed in a virtual space and could only have existed in that space. Because I think that, there's going to continue to be opportunities for that kind of experience, which is not something that you could have necessarily done 10 years ago. Point 4, arts journalists are essential workers. They're still looking for things to write about. Learn to talk to them. I think of all the points that I talk about, this is going to be the one that sounds like the nuttiest or like the most out of touch, but like I truly believe in this one. How do you develop a following as an artist, right? How do you develop, how do you develop a following? How do you get people to pay attention to what you're doing when there is so much stuff out there? And the kind of typical answer here is social media. You cultivate a following on social media using the kind of tools that you have at your disposal as a person that uses social media, hashtags, following the right people, like engaging content, all that kind of stuff. And that is a great way to continue to, kind of build an audience for your work, build a following for your work. But, in addition to that, you would be shocked at the number of people and the reach that like old-fashioned media, by which I basically mean newspapers and radio, what a wide cross-section of an audience that gets to. For example, we were doing an artistic project at Springboard earlier this year. We called it the Community Supported Art Project. And what we did is we commissioned 9 artists to make 50 original works. And we packaged those works into, boxes that we would then mail, in the mail, the United States Postal Service, to the people that bought them. And then they would have the experience of like getting this box full of art, and like they were packaged kind of nicely and they looked cool. And like when you open them, it was kind of a whole, it was a whole experience. And the shares sold out in like 10 minutes. And the reason they sold out in 10 minutes is because we were able to get an article in the Minneapolis Star-Tribune about it. And it just reached a much larger audience than it would have if we had just been using kind of our internal kind of marketing, whether that's social media or newsletters or anything else. So especially if you are on the younger side, like you have your youth at your advantage. Like people are always looking for like the next thing, the young thing. So you have that kind of working to your advantage. And so it's kind of important, I think, to learn how to talk to arts journalists. There are still some out there, and they're looking for things to write about. And so just from an etiquette standpoint, just pretend you're in elementary school again. It's the 2000s. Don't send them direct messages on Instagram. Don't do that. Just email them. Email them a press release. Email them some information about what you're doing. Invite them to look at it somewhere online, and kind of open up the opportunity for them to cover what you're doing. And that could be a show, that could be a live stream, that could be like really anything that you're doing where you would just like to kind of get some attention. Because as important as it is to have a following on social media and to kind of use those tools, you also kind of want to start to get a paper trail, like you kind of want to get like almost like a folder of clippings about your work, written about newspapers, magazines, like websites, stuff like that. So yeah, learn to talk to arts journalists. They're looking for things to write about, and whatever you're working on may be a very good match for them. Here's just a smattering of, kind of like, East Metro, Wisconsin-based media that you could, that you could do. I mean, everything from the Dunn County News to the, Eau Claire Leader Telegram, Wisconsin Public Radio, Minnesota Public Radio, Pioneer Press in St. Paul covers a lot of like East Metro, Western Wisconsin. The Star Tribune has 2 full-time arts writers that are always looking for things in the region to write about. And so even if you just got in the habit of sending out press releases to each of these, 6 organizations, the chances of you getting, some coverage from that and a little bit of a bounce in terms of your followers, in terms of the kind of public interest, is worthwhile. And again, I appreciate that probably sounds kind of bizarre that like these kind of old legacy media outlets are going to be a useful tool, but I do think they are. They kind of help, I think, with your kind of credibility and sort of opening your path forward. Any questions so far? I can't actually see the chat very well when I am doing the slide presentation, so I don't know if anything is coming up there.
Nothing has popped up yet. I'll let you know.
Okay.
Everyone's just, listening.
Just taking it in. After I told everybody to use the space virtually and don't pretend that it's an in-person presentation. That's okay. Sometimes you have to do that. But in terms of getting your art out there, because like this is going to be the big question for you in the next couple of months. And this would be true whether there was a pandemic or not. Like you've had, 4, 5, if you're like me, years of undergrad, you've developed a body of work, like you've put your thesis together, like you've had your show, your senior show. You are ready to do whatever that next thing is, whether that's like move to New York or Chicago and like try to take that place by storm, or like, move back to your hometown for a little while to save some money so you can do something, or, put together some kind of exhibition, or, just anything that you want to do, like get national, get some national publications, or, if you're a designer, get some interesting clients. There's so many ways to go about doing that. But I think one way, and kind of an important way, especially kind of as we come out of the pandemic and people are looking for opportunities to be back in the world again, is to think like hyper locally. Like, what are some projects that you can do that can exist like in an incredibly hyper local space? Again, I think just because in the last year everybody's world was reduced to such a small, geographic area, like, you might have overheard, like Aaron and I were talking about Uptown Minneapolis and how like, Uptown Minneapolis is like 3 miles from my house, but I haven't been anywhere near there for the last year. I've been around my neighborhood here, like East Lake Street and in this area. And I think a lot of the interesting projects that I have seen from artists were things that were happening in a hyper local kind of context. I think it was art projects that were using all of these, like all of these places, whether they were work that was going in windows or things that people were just printing at home and putting up on telephone poles. I've seen so many interesting U.S. Postal Service related art projects in the last couple of months. I think one example of that was the community supported art project that we did, because it was a way to get work by artists directly into people's homes using this setup that everybody has access to, the U.S. Postal Service. So I think there were just so many interesting projects that were happening in this very hyper local way that kind of takes advantage of the fact that, for better or for worse, people have been kind of cordoned off in their immediate neighborhoods and their immediate communities for a pretty long time. And so, besides getting your work out, to a national or an international audience and thinking about how you build that profile, what are some kind of cool things that you can do, right in your neighborhood, right in your neighborhood, kind of right in your immediate community that will, kind of like put you in touch with people that are around you right now. So, I think that's been one of the, if you can say there's an upside, not to the pandemic, but maybe to the lockdown and just the kind of the focusing on this intensely small geographic space that we've been confined to, is just, I think, a real flowering of kind of the immediate community, and a real flowering of kind of people being out in the same spaces, and kind of getting a sense for their immediate neighborhood. And I think a lot of artists have been finding interesting ways to kind of speak to that. And this was one such project from a couple of months ago. A group, I think, of artists and other people called the COVID Sitters, that were, matching, volunteers with hospital workers, and just kind of creating this sort of social safety net. And it was mostly like conveyed to people by, like text chains and WhatsApp chains, and even like things stapled to telephone poles. With little like tear offs, just letting people know that this was out there. So yeah. So my sixth point, I guess, which is that people are eager to be back in the world again. And so this is a really good idea, or a really good opportunity to strengthen old connections that you have and build some new connections. Just because, again, people have been locked in their houses for so long, or a lot of people have been locked in their houses for so long, not everybody, but people are going to be really excited to kind of either pick up where they left off with you, or to just kind of start something new. I think one of the interesting things about like the last year is that, I don't know what your experience has been, but I think I found out like who my real friends and colleagues were, because they were the people that I stayed in touch. That a lot of my less kind of stable, maybe even less fulfilling kind of relationships fell away a little bit, because I was so focused on like a core group of people that I was just in touch with all the time. A lot of whom were artists working both in the Twin Cities and also beyond. So it's a good time coming out to start thinking about strengthening old connections and building new ones. And this is where we maybe start to get into some of the more standard kind of professional development talk here, that is going to be true or untrue, that it's going to be relevant regardless of like whether there's a pandemic or not. This may actually be my favorite chart that I've ever made in my entire life. I might get this tattooed to myself. I don't know. So this is the way. This is kind of like a crash course on networking, I guess. This is always the way that I think of it. Like, you've got you, right? You're you. You know what you know. You do what you do. You have an idea where you're going. Probably, you have an idea what you want your life to look like. The way I've always thought about it, when you are thinking about what you want your life as an artist to look like, your life as a designer, your life as a creative person, is to kind of look at people that are not your peers exactly, but that are people maybe 5 years out from where you are now in terms of their professional careers, right? Like, if you look at what they have now, it's kind of where you see yourself in 5 years. Maybe not like exactly that, but either in terms of like what they're doing, what kind of projects they have going, like what the nature of their work does, the kind of thing, the kind of work that you admire, the kind of work that you see and think, all right, I just need a couple of years and I can do that. Because I've definitely done this in my own work, where I've, been thinking about people that are, again, about 5 years ahead of me in terms of what they're accomplishing. And so I guess I kind of think about it like this. You want to kind of close that gap between you and that person that is 5 years ahead of you. And so I think you do it in a couple of different ways. It starts with like mailing lists and social media follows, right? Like, if you admire somebody's work, you follow them on social media. You like their posts, you comment on their posts. Not like in a creepy, overbearing way. You don't send them a bunch of like direct messages about like how much you love their stuff and you're going to be best friends. That'll put people off real quick. But you just kind of more like passively engage with what they're doing. If they have like a mailing list, like an email list, you sign up for it. You follow them on Instagram or wherever else. That's kind of what you start with. I think from there you can get a little bit more, because I mean, I think the people that are 5 years ahead of you, not only are they people that you're, they're kind of role models, but they are also people that can at some point become collaborators, can become mentors. One of the things about me from when I graduated from college is, when you're in school, you have like this whole system of people that are like either ahead of you in college, they're like older students that you look up to. And then you have professors that, are like mentors. You have a kind of a relationship with them where there's a back and forth. There's, an opportunity to kind of, to get feedback on what you're doing, to get guidance, which is really great and it's really nurturing. And then as soon as you graduate, it disappears completely, or it doesn't disappear completely, but it's like you don't have professors when you are out in the world, right? Like you have to kind of create your own opportunities for exchange and for mentorship and for continuing to learn and to grow as an artist. And so these people that are about 5 years ahead of you, these are the people that may become, mentors, may kind of serve that purpose. And so I always think of that second step as being like, you kind of go beyond a virtual, relationship. Like artists that I admired, that were a little bit, a few years beyond me, when I started putting out like publications or zines or things like that, and like maybe they knew who I was because they recognized my name from Instagram or something, I'd send them stuff in the mail. Like I would send them a copy of like, a new zine that I had put out, or like I'd send an invitation like on a postcard to a show that I was having. I would just kind of send them stuff in the mail because that's, it's like, that's a kind of a nice thing for somebody to get. It feels like it's an opportunity to be reciprocal, but it's not necessarily like it's not intrusive. It's not like creepy. I mean, it could be creepy. Anything could be creepy, but people like getting stuff in the mail. And then I think the third step beyond that is the great advantage that we as visual artists have over writers and actors and musicians is that we have this whole kind of culture of studio visits. If you are talking to an artist and you invite them over for a studio visit, you kind of invite yourself over to their studio for a studio visit. Like there's an understanding of what that is and what that entails. It means that you're going to, sit down with the person, hang out, talk about what they're doing, like maybe make a connection in terms of like future opportunities, but maybe not. Maybe it's just kind of a social call and it's just an opportunity to kind of talk about your work, talk about the kind of work that they're doing, and to see what kind of conversation comes out of that. Like the studio visit is a convention that doesn't really exist in other art forms. Like we kind of have it to ourselves as visual artists. So it is totally an okay thing to, get in touch with folks and whose work you admire and just say, yeah, I'd like to come do a studio visit. The kind of the proviso here is the kind of the dreaded informational interview. That's a phrase that you hear professionally sometimes, that to the extent that you're able, I would dissuade you from using, because I think, I don't know, it really kind of makes a person's heart sink when they get an email for an informational interview, because it's typically a very one-sided sort of thing. It's like you're going to meet this person and have them kind of talk to you about what they want you to do for them. Or even if that's not true, that's often the way that it seems. And so I would dissuade you from the informational interview kind of approach. Studio visits, like schedule studio visits. And then, ultimately that leads to collaborations, I think. Like that leads to collaborations, to mentorships, to other kind of great opportunities that kind of strengthen your connection to the art world and just kind of strengthen your connection to other artists. So yeah, this is the kind of the you 5 years from now model, just in terms of networking. I mean, networking is one of those terms that like always has a kind of vaguely sleazy connotation to it, I think. But it doesn't have to be. I mean, networking is really just kind of making connections with other people that are doing work that you admire and will hopefully admire your own work. So point number 7. Oh, are there any questions so far? Anything in the chat? Anything that people would like to share? Anybody would like to get in touch with me about an informational interview? I mean, I'll do one. It's my job, but studio visit would be more fun. So point number 7, use the time to plan for the future, figure out what tools you need to improve. For better or for worse, being an artist is, under the best circumstances, a part-time job, and in many circumstances is a full-time job, and it may even be a full-time job that you have in addition to an actual full-time job. There's a lot of little things that you kind of need to manage in the same way that you need to manage any kind of a small business. And so in that immediate time where you're coming out of college and, the student debt hasn't hit you really hard yet, and hopefully because you've gone to Stout, you've made the smart choice. You hopefully don't have a ton of student debt that you're going to be saddled with. you have some time to kind of think strategically about what you want to do, to plan the future and to get where it is you want to go, whether that's like making a full-time living as a designer, or, having a show in New York, or like, being a studio apprentice for, whoever. This is the time to kind of think about some of those things. So I don't know, this probably overlaps a little bit with stuff that you've been getting in your professional practice workshops, or not workshops. They're called classes when you're in college. They're called workshops when you leave college. This probably overlaps a little bit with that, but I want to reemphasize these because I think like these 7 things are incredibly important. Like in some ways, having these 7 things like ready to go is going to make the biggest difference in terms of whether like you have a relatively fulfilling career or your career is kind of a bummer. Which is not to say that you can't have a fulfilling career without these things, but it makes it a lot more difficult. So I'll just go through them real quick. Basically, this is the kind of kit of things that you need to take advantage of opportunities as they come up. Because as much as you can look for opportunities, apply for shows, apply for jobs, you can make a plan to really methodically, really strategically apply for those things. But just the way the world is, like opportunities come up all the time that you're totally not expecting, It's because you're like texting with somebody and they say, oh, did you hear about this thing? You'd be great for this. You should apply for it. And the deadline is tomorrow, right? So, you can either like stay up all night trying to cram all this stuff together, or if you have it ready to go, like it'll just be a lot easier for you to kind of get it out to as many different opportunities as possible. Again, whether those are shows, whether those are jobs, whether those are exhibitions, residencies, anything like that. A cover letter or a letter of introduction, that's really just kind of like a template that you have that says, dear so-and-so, attached, please find my application for this. It's just the kind of thing that you find yourself having to write over and over again, especially when you're applying for jobs. It's just good to have like, a template ready to go that you can like go in and customize as needed. An artist statement. And again, when I was talking about like work that people hate doing, writing about their work being one of the big ones. This is one of the big ones. But an earnest statement doesn't need to be super complicated. It just needs to be a who, what, and why. Who are you? What do you do? Why do you do it? I'm Andy Sturdivant. I'm a Minneapolis-based, publisher and writer and artist. I create works that draw on archives and present them in an affordable, accessible, formats. I'm just picking this up at the top of my head, but you get the idea. Like basically covering the who, the what, and the why. You want to have an artist resume, which is going to be different than a professional resume. It's going to be different than the resume that you're like, sending to Old Navy or whoever, if you want to get a job at Old Navy. It's something that highlights the work that you've done as an artist. And again, you've probably talked about this in your professional practice classes. You want to have about 20 JPEG images of recent work. Obviously, since you're students, like most of your work's not going to be older than like 4 or 5 years, which is great. Start with that stuff. Maybe you can have some high school stuff in there, but probably it's going to be stuff from your last couple of years of school, like sophomore through senior year. An image list, which lists all the title, the media, the date for the images that you have. And again, you think like, well, I know what that stuff is, but you're going to have to make a list like that over and over again when you're applying for shows, when you're applying for opportunities, that kind of thing. So best to just do it in such a way that you have it ready to go and you don't have to remake it again. Promotional materials, which is like postcards, business cards, like actual physical objects that you have. Probably you won't have as many of those starting out, but you will have them eventually. And then I think the last one, recent either reviews of your work, articles about your work, and this could be on blogs, this could be on like, newspaper websites, this could be just about anything, but you really want to get in the habit now while you are thinking about it, to just be really good about archiving your stuff that's out there in the world, like, because this is the time to do it. And what you want to do is just be sure that you have stuff either like screenshotted or scanned as a JPEG or a PDF. Why do I mention this? Okay, right? Like city pages was the kind of alternative weekly in Minneapolis for, 30 years, 40 years, right? They closed down almost overnight because the owners closed it down. I had so many articles about my work, so many like things that I'd written that all just completely vanished because they took the archive offline. And like I got some of it, like some of it was kind of organized, but honestly, I didn't have it as organized as I should have. And the work of restructuring all that and putting that together for myself is going to take me a pretty long time. It's work that I didn't have to do if I had just been better organized about it. So with digital assets, right? Like the old saying goes, they're fleeting like a passing mist that is like trying to catch hold of a breath. All vanishes like vapor, except PDFs that you have saved in two different places. So basically what I'm telling you here is anytime you have more than two things, or anytime you have anything about you written online, whether it's like, I mean, it could be, if you're featured on like a design Tumblr or like, a really like heavily followed Instagram account that is highlighting your work, whether it's like a newspaper column or a newspaper article, be sure that you're saving it as a PDF and storing it somewhere because like stuff online, it seems like it's going to be there forever, but it really does kind of disappear. So you kind of owe it to your future self, I guess. Again, you might be thinking like, whatever, I'm 22 years old. Like I haven't had anybody write articles about me. That's going to happen real soon. Like there is going to be coverage of your work. There is going to be stuff about you out there a lot sooner than you think. And it probably you already have some from, just being in school and like having stuff in the student paper, like maybe one of the shows that you did was covered in the student paper. That's the kind of thing you want to start saving because, the only person that's going to archive your work is you. Unfortunately, until you get to a certain point where you have, like, I don't know, assistants doing it, but most of us are not at that point. And this is also a time to think about your resume. You want to start kind of building out your resume. And again, you might be saying like, I'm 22 years old. Like I don't have much of a resume. Like I just graduated. I'm just going to graduate in spring. Like I've got one show and that's it. Well, okay, that's true. But again, this is the time to kind of build out that resume and to start thinking about like what you want to get on there. And that can be, the thing about a resume is it's really, there's no right way to do a resume. There's only good ways to do resumes, right? There's no one right, true path to a perfect resume. Like resumes are going to look different depending on who's putting them together. So things like residencies, professional activities like student committees that you served on, lectures, panels, workshops, presentations that you were part of, that you attended, juries that you served on, gallery affiliations. This last one is the most important one. Projects you made up and you and your friends did them, but they're real. Like, I mean, that's the thing. You could put anything on a resume. If you've got a gang of 3 friends and you put together a show in your apartment and like 20 people show up and, everyone has some beer and assuming you're old enough to drink in that case, it just like kind of has a night out and it's like a real gallery show, except it's your apartment. Well, that's like a real show. Like you had to put that together. You had to stretch the paintings, you had to hang them on the wall, you had to light them, you had to invite people. You functionally did all the things that you would have to do if you were putting together a, quote unquote, real gallery show. And so even things like that, you can put on your resume, just anything that's shown that you're out there, you've been active, you've been putting together a career, you've been doing it. This is maybe a little bit of a pet peeve, but don't forget to remove your GPA from your resume because old people, it makes them feel older and we hate it when we're made to feel old. Sometimes I'll be looking at a resume for work for like an exhibition and they'll say like, my GPA was 3.8. And I'll be like, ugh. Overachievers, students. I don't know. This could just be me, but you can probably remove your GPA from your resume. Again, differing opinions about this probably. And I think the other part of it too, in addition to the resume, in addition to the artist statement, like good work samples are in some ways the most important thing that you have because they're the one thing that you have almost complete and total control over, especially because we are living in a world where most people are going to be encountering your work digitally for the first time, right? They're going to see it on your Instagram page. They're going to see it, like on a website. They're going to see it like, online somewhere. And so the thing that you want to do is just be sure you have the absolute best work samples you can. I mean, this is you're kind of at a point now in your careers where you are a student. You are probably hanging out with people that are photographers because they're majoring in photography. So they probably have access to better, like cameras than you do. I mean, you could do a lot with an iPhone in terms of documentation, but, if you can find somebody to take pictures of your work and to document your work in a really good, really professional, really clear way. Everything's in focus, everything's clear. It shows the work in context. It shows the work kind of on its own terms against a neutral background. You just want to be sure that you have really good work samples because, especially with a lot of work, it's pretty ephemeral. If you have an installation, this is the thing about like senior shows with in college is like you've got a gallery that's professionally lit, everything looks good. Like you're not going to have opportunities like that very often. And so you just really want to take advantage of having the best possible work samples you have, in the same way that like you want to be sure that everything you put on Instagram or on the main page at least looks good, is appealing and attractive. Point number 8, kind of coming up on the last of our 9. And then we'll have plenty of time at the end for questions too, if people do have those. Again, this is a kind of this covers a lot of territory, and it's like any one of these slides you could spend a whole hour and a half talking about. But point number 8 is that consumers obviously have gotten very comfortable with e-commerce in the past year because everyone's been at home looking at things that they want to buy on Instagram, then ordering them and having them come in boxes in the US mail. So this is a good time if you haven't done it to set up your online store, and then to be sure that that store is connected to all your other online presences. I mean, I would encourage every single person here, regardless of what you do, whether you're a designer, whether you're a painter, whether you're a sculptor, you want to have some kind of e-commerce platform. You want to have it possible for people to buy your work directly from you. Because again, you're not always going to be able to rely on galleries. You're not always going to be able to rely on some of these other mechanisms that are out there. And, you don't need to be selling like, if you're a painter that paints, like 7-foot canvases, like you're obviously not going to be able to sell 7-foot canvases to people like via the US Postal Service, but you probably do have other things like whether those are prints, whether those are zines, whether those are publications, whether those are, small scale artistic creations or products of one kind or another. It's a great idea to have an e-commerce platform. This is a whole bunch of them here. Some of you may already use one or more of these. Some of you may be on Etsy already. They all have their advantages and disadvantages. And like, I could talk for an hour about the advantages and disadvantages of each one of these. But I don't know, for my money, something like Big Cartel or Shopify are probably the easiest. They're really inexpensive. They're easy to set up. They look good. Like, you can connect it to your main website. It's easy to link to from your Instagram page. It just makes it really easy for people to send you money, basically, in exchange for goods or services that you as an artist are offering. So I would absolutely encourage everybody to have, some e-commerce platform set up, regardless of what kind of work you do. And it's the kind of thing where, like, for me, for example, like I have 2 websites basically. I have a Squarespace page, which is where a lot of my writing and like artistic projects happen. So if you want to go like read about the project that I did with Professor Loom several years ago, you can go to that page and you can read about it. You can see some samples. You can see other stuff that I've done, and it's kind of a repository for the work, and it just kind of exists as an archive, in a way to stay updated about whatever it is I'm doing. But I also have an online store where I sell publications and zines and other things that I've done. And with that, you can order some of them, put your credit card information online. The money comes to me. I put it in an envelope. I send it to you in the mail. And, that kind of thing supports a lot of the other work that I do. I don't pull in a huge amount of money from it, but I pull in enough money to make it, worthwhile, at least to kind of perpetuate itself. So yeah, I would encourage everybody to have some kind of e-commerce platform set up if you don't already, even if it's just for smaller scale work. I mean, the kind of the essence of it is you want to make it easy for people to pay you. I will say here, this may not be relevant to you, but maybe it is. Don't accept payments for artwork on Venmo. Um, Venmo is really only for kind of, you know, buying people beers or like personal stuff, right? And the only reason I say this now is because I talk to a lot of artists that, will like have something on Instagram and like somebody says, "Oh my God, I love this thing. I want to buy it." Like, and they just say, "Okay, well, just Venmo me the money." Um, that's fine for like small scale stuff, but as you start to sell more stuff, you actually kind of create some problems for yourself selling on Venmo because Venmo is not really set up for like for commercial sales for reasons that we'll talk about in just a second. So make it easy for people to pay you. And the way that you do that is actually by setting up some of these platforms like Big Cartel, Shopify, Etsy. They're all connected to like Square, to Stripe, to all of these other kind of payment platforms that are out there. And then last of all, this is just a good time to figure out complex systems you'll need to understand for your career. And this is a lot of the work that I do at Springboard. Just helping people think through some of these complex systems that are related to, money, usually, not always, but often are related to money. And this is an example of some of these things right here. Like, these may seem like terms that you have absolutely no desire to think about, that you feel like you probably will not have to learn about for many, many years to come. And, that could be, but eventually, if you're doing work out in the world, if you're selling artwork, if you're selling services, if you're being hired to design things, like you're going to need to know all of this stuff at some point. And again, you can put it off for a while, like you can put it off for a really long time. But if you're in a situation now where, your professional situation is somewhat fluid, you're not like stuck paying mortgage on a house yet, or you don't, you have some time and flexibility to think about like what you want your career as an artist to look like. These are good things to figure out because if you get it figured out now, like you'll have it figured out for the rest of your life. And so I'm going to cram semesters worth of business development classes into one little slide here. There's really three things that you can do. Like if you graduate school and think, all right, I'm going to do this. I'm going to make a career as an artist. I'm going to sell stuff online. I'm going to get commissions. I'm going to, get contract jobs for, design work, any of these things. There's actually three things that you can do relatively easily to make all that stuff a lot simpler to put together. So one is filing what's called an LLC, which is a limited liability company. And that basically just takes you, the person, you, the individual citizen, it makes you a company, basically. And you have some of the protections and rights and privileges that a company has, usually related to like liability. If you get in debt with your company, if somebody like is coming into your studio and a canvas falls on them and they sue you, having an LLC basically means that none of your personal assets can be kind of taken away. Somebody couldn't sue you for like having a painting fall on them and then they could like take your car or like take your laptop or something like that. It just kind of creates a little bit of like, it just makes everything a little bit more official. It's about $150 to do that. It takes like 10 minutes. It again kind of creates the opportunity for you to be a company in a way that is just a little easier to separate out your professional practices and your professional business from your personal practices and your personal business. Barring that, you can also get what's called an assumed name or a DBA, which is doing business as, which basically just kind of takes you, the person, and you, the artist slash company slash small business, and separates them out a little bit. Once you've done that, you can file for what's called an EIN through the IRS. That will that's called an employer identification number is what that stands for. It's free. It basically just makes it so that when you're doing your taxes, when you are, have any kind of situation where you need to use your social security number, it just kind of creates another number that you can use instead of your social security number. So again, your business is like separate from your personal. And then the last part of that is you take your EIN, you take your LLC, you go down to your credit union or to your bank and you open up a business checking account, which is just like your regular checking account, except it's a business checking account. So it's in that name. It basically makes it so that all your business stuff is completely separate from your personal stuff, right? And that may not be as big of a factor now, but when you get to the point where you're really making a career doing this and you want to start like making deductions on your taxes, again, this sounds so boring. I appreciate, but it is one of those things where if you could just kind of wrap your head around it now, you'll be so far ahead of everybody else when it's important. And having the business checking account just makes it so that if you're using Square, if you're using Stripe, if you're using PayPal, all that stuff be going into that account. So basically, if people are sending you money to buy things that they saw on Instagram, to buying things they saw on your website, it's all going to the same place. It's all business. It's just really easy for you to take that and keep it separate from, the account that you're using to buy pizza and pay rent and all those other things. So again, it sounds like the most boring, like possibly irrelevant thing on earth, but I promise you'll need to think about these things at some point, and it's just a good opportunity to do that now. And there's just a lot of stuff out there too that you want to see if you could start to get a handle on. Accounting tools you probably don't need to worry about too much right now, but you do want to keep like a Google Sheets, just kind of like if you're selling stuff, right? If you're selling stuff on your website, you just want to keep track of like what's going out. Like it's kind of that. It's kind of related to that archiving part that I talked about earlier. Like whenever there's stuff about you out there, you want to be sure that you know where it is, you have it in one place. And so having just a Google Sheet to just kind of like, here's all the stuff that I did, here's the prices, here's who I sold it to, just keeping track of those things. Again, with payment tools, Square, Stripe, PayPal, not Venmo, although Venmo is apparently coming out with a business payment system. So, maybe that'll happen. But for now, like Square, Stripe, PayPal, those platforms. It's a good idea to get to get a mailing list set up through something like MailChimp. You kind of use that in conjunction with your your social media following, your just any other ways of marketing that you have. It's just a really good idea to have a mailing list, because there's a deeper level of engagement with mailing lists typically than there is with some of the other tools that you have. And there's some really great shipping tools out there too, like ShipStation is one that a lot of people use. It just kind of makes it so that if you have oriented your business around like e-commerce and mailing people things, it just makes it a lot easier to like pay for shipping, to kind of keep the tracking number straight, to just be accountable for all the stuff that you're putting in the mail and to keep track of it. So with 7 minutes to go, that's about all I've got. I mean, the most important thing here, I guess, in some ways, is like, it says get in touch anytime, and I really do mean that. Like, you can get in touch with me via, email, phone, whatever works for you. Like, if there's things that I talked about tonight that kind of plant a seed of something that you're interested in thinking about in the future, let me know. Like, it is, again, truly my job to like sit around and wait for artists to get in touch with me to kind of help them figure out whatever they need to get figured out for doing what they want to do. So, if you're planning an exhibition, if you're planning like, a cool art collaborative with your friends, if you are wanting to like start an e-commerce business, any of that stuff, I'm totally open to kind of talking through any of those things. And so I just want to make myself available as a resource for everybody out there that should need, assistance with any of these things that we've talked about tonight.
Oops.
Oh, okay.
Right. Thank you so much, Andy. Oh my goodness. That is just insanely fantastic information. I cannot believe how lucky whoever showed up tonight got to hear about all these different things. I wish I would have known a lot of this stuff 20 years ago. So I see some people are leaving, but this is a great time. If you had any questions at all, Andy is here to clarify or expound on any things that he talked about tonight? I do see a question here. Okay, Hazel says, do you ever work with comic artists or graphic novelists? And I'm assuming Hazel, I'm not sure, maybe you can write what major you're in too. So do you ever work with comic artists or graphic novelists?
Yes, I do pretty regularly. Just because in some ways with, with comic artists and graphic novelists, like there's a lot of art considerations in there just in terms of like the usual things that you need to know in terms of like drawing and production and that sort of thing. But there's also a lot of considerations around like publishing too, like okay, so studio art major with double concentration in comics and drawing. Yeah, that's awesome. That's great. Yeah, because in addition to just the usual kind of production, kind of considerations, there's also a whole aspect of publishing that yeah, we work with people quite a bit on that. So I was working with a comic artist this month actually, and so the kind of questions that we had where he wanted to put a book out. He'd put a book out a couple of years ago and was ready to do it again, had a new body of work, and so mostly what we were talking about was the kind of the pitch letter that you have to have. Like he was trying to figure out, is it something that he wants to put out on his own and like self-publish it, or is it the kind of thing where he wants to find like an indie publisher or a mainstream publisher to put it out? And so we just kind of talked about like the pros and cons of that, like the advantages and disadvantages of that. Like it's really easy to put stuff out yourself. If you can find a good like printer and production partner to work with, if you're comfortable like doing a lot of the marketing stuff yourself, like setting up the distribution and all those kinds of things, it is something that you can do by yourself. But if you want to go through, well, so anyway, I talked a lot about that. But Hazel, is there something you were thinking more specifically with like kind of things that you've been thinking about or trying to work out for what that's going to look like for you?
And you can feel free to unmute yourself too as well if you have a question. You don't have to just type it in the chat.
Oh right, I forgot this is faster. Anyway, basically I was just trying to feel out what the scene is kind of like, how often you interact with those sorts of careers, I guess. I would like to be an illustrator, so not comic books necessarily, but kind of that merging of art and storytelling, and I was just wondering how present that kind of is in the people that you work with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say it's present. We definitely work with a fair number of illustrators and comic artists. Probably not as many as I'd like, but yeah, we do, and a lot of it kind of comes down to helping them figure out both the kinds of questions that any artist has to figure out, which is like, how am I going to make a living doing this, but also some of those things that are more specific to to illustrators. I'm trying to think. I don't know that any of the ACCs that we have. I'm trying to think if any of them are like kind of more directly involved in illustration. There's a couple that have done some of it. I can't think of who they are right now, but yeah, I mean, so with Springboard, we work with artists in any discipline. Which makes it really kind of open for any number of people coming from any number of artistic backgrounds. But yeah, I mean, we try to specialize to the extent that we can. So if you were to do a consultation, about that kind of work, then yeah, probably a lot of it would be like, yeah, trying to figure out like what resources are out there, like what opportunities there are for your work, like getting involved with an organization like the AIGA, or sending pitch letters to like editors to get editorial work. So yeah, those kinds of considerations.
Hazel says, awesome. There's a lot of thank yous going on. So I just have a question, and that is like, you work with people at any stage in their career, and Springboard is amazing every time I've needed anything. And I actually didn't know how in-depth the offerings were, But how often do you see people that work with you like over a long period of time where they kind of like check in and work on stuff and come back and like you kind of become like, a career mentor in some way? Or how do people, I mean, I'm sure everybody uses it a different way. Maybe it's just, for that particular endeavor that they're looking into or hurdle they want to get over. But yeah, do you have like long term sort of where you have people that work with you and others?
Yeah, I've been at Springboard for 11 years actually, which is kind of outrageous that I could be in a job for that long. So yeah, I mean, there's definitely people that I, check in with, maybe not every month, but like, yeah, there's people we hear from really regularly. Um, and yeah, I mean, yeah, there's definitely some folks that kind of come into the services and just are around and check in pretty regularly. So yeah, I've been really kind of lucky to see, yeah, a lot of careers kind of bloom and develop and grow over years. So yeah, I mean, we a lot of my colleagues have been at Springboard for a pretty long time too. So once we get to know somebody, we really, we're around through a lot of different, through every phase of the person's career, really. Like, I mean, I work with kids that are coming, youth that are coming right out of school and trying to figure out what to do. And like on the other end of things too, like I work with a lot of artists on estate planning and like, artists that are kind of at the end of their careers and at the end of their lives even are trying to figure out like what's going to happen with 50 years worth of artwork that I've made. Like, where's it going to go? And so that's the conversation that we have too. So it's really everything in between.
That's amazing. So, anybody else that's out there, um, have any other
I
questions?
have my hand up.
I think Tim's got his hand up.
I have my hand up. Sorry, no, I just
Oh, always
hand
overlooked.
up.
Oh, poor Tim. Go
Um,
ahead.
Thanks for an awesome talk, Andy. That was super informative. So at Stout, we have this as part of the studio art program. We have this field experience that we ask all our students to do. It's just like a 1 credit field experience. And it's really difficult at the moment to think like how to direct them towards it. It's supposed to be like, they're supposed to find the opportunity, and it's really supposed to sort of put them in touch with a kind of professional situation. And we just had advisement day today, so I was talking to lots of students about this, and it's kind of like it's hard to know where to point them, So I was just wondering if you had any insights into this. I almost feel like we're defining it in like a kind of old-fashioned way. It's like, you could intern at a gallery, or maybe you could be a studio assistant, and it just seems like now things have so utterly changed that maybe we just have to redefine even what a field experience in the arts might be. So I was just curious if you had any insights about that.
Yeah, I mean, this is like, we've definitely heard from a lot of schools with the similar kinds of questions. On a practical level, like I'm happy to be a resource for thinking through that, as far as suggesting different organizations or that kind of thing. But yeah, I mean, it seems to me like the things that are most helpful are, when you can kind of identify an organization and identify the need that they might have that can be fulfilled, virtually or remotely. Again, that's not going to be like, yeah, the kind of traditional stuff like painting the walls and, like hanging the artwork and that kind of thing. But yeah, I mean, I guess the thing to pay attention to maybe is the types of programming that organizations are offering and what kind of remote or virtual programming they're offering, and try to figure out how the students or how you as a student can be involved with that part of it, which is not necessarily like a marketing thing, but maybe that's with like, that could be anything from like, yeah, I mean, any kind of work that can be done remotely, whether that's like evaluation or outreach or, kind of even technical facilitation, um, things like that. I mean, I guess the thing is to, yeah, look at organizations and see who's doing the work in, who's gotten really kind of progressive about the way that they're handling kind of post-physical programming and trying to identify what some of those needs might be.
All right. Thank you for that. And we're going over a little bit. So I think that if there's any last questions that people have, I know our students probably have a lot going on or had a lot going on today.
Because you've been like at it all day. Yeah, right.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
we
mean,
should.
some of us can stay on later if, the teachers, if they so desire. But I just want to thank you again and for your generosity of your time and all this information. I'm just blown away by what you packed into that amount of time.
Thank you.
I mean, that was the most nutritious, nutrient dense presentation about like art career and the help that people can get in this area. We're really lucky to have Springboard for the Arts here in our immediate area. So thanks for taking time with us tonight.
Anytime. Like I love Stout.
Thanks so much for doing this, Andy. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, I'm gonna go to bed now.
Yeah.
You've had such a long day. Thank you, Tim.
Yeah, I have to go eat dinner. My wife has been telling me I didn't eat enough today, and so it's
Someone's got to take care of Andy.
yeah, gotta take. Who will take care of me? No, I will take care of me. That's the whole point. We gotta take care of ourselves.
That's right. That was the first slide.
That's the first point. Yeah, take care
right.
of
Well
yourself.
All
So-
right. Well, thanks again, Andy, and look forward to seeing you next time.
Yeah, see you next time. Thanks, everybody. See y'all.
Thanks, Andy.
Bye.
See you
Bye.
later.
So goodbye. Thanks, everyone.